Welcome to A Scientist Walks into a Bar. I'm your host, Amanda Thomas, and today we're talking about sharks and what it's like to be a marine scientist. I got a chance to talk with Jasmin Graham, who is a marine biologist at the Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium in Sarasota, Florida. She's also one of the founders of a group called Minorities in Shark Sciences, or MISS. They promote diversity and inclusion in shark science and encourage women of color to contribute knowledge in marine science. She also really loves Sawfish. I asked her about her work, she busted some myths about sharks, and we talked about how science is the best way we currently have to answer questions about our world. Here's our conversation. So welcome, Jasmin. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us what you do for work and where you work and just more about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a shark biologist. So I study a group of animals called chondrichthyans, specifically elasmobranchs. And those are cartilaginous fishes. So they're fish that are made up of the same stuff that your nose and ears are made of. They don't actually have any bones. Pretty cool. And so I study them. I study their ecology, which is like where they live and how they move. And I've also done some studying of their evolution. So I work at Mote Marine Lab and Aquarium as the project coordinator for Marseillais, which is a long name, which is the Marine Science Laboratory Alliance Center of Excellence. Marseillais for short, because who wants to say that a lot of times?
Right.
I also am a co-founder of Minorities in Shark Sciences, MISS. So I do a lot of work with both Marseillais and MISS in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in marine science and understanding how to recruit, support, and retain minority students in marine science.
Great. Thanks. I'm glad I had you list all of that off because I would not have been quite as eloquent. So thank you for that. You say that you are a shark biologist and a program director, I think you said?
Project coordinator, yeah.
What does your average day look like?
I don't think there is a normal day. Lots of things happen. I wear lots of hats. I do lots of jobs. So I'll start off with what I do whenever I'm doing my science. So I study movement ecology. So all of my research right now deals with tagging a critically endangered species called the small-toothed sawfish. I also go out and do a lot of fishing. I work with Tanya Wiley of Havenworth Coastal Conservation. And we go out on the boat and we either are fishing or collecting data. So on days that we're collecting data, we have a group of us that goes out and we have some people that are in the water and some people on the boat. Whoever's in the water that day swims down to the bottom to get the receiver and brings it up. And then we download the data. Whoever's topside on the boat that day cleans off the receivers because there's lots of like organisms that decide they want to live on things that you put in the water because they don't care that it's an expensive piece of scientific equipment. They're like, you know what? This is a great place for an oyster to live right here. So you got to get all of the organisms off of it. And then we download the data. So it'll tell us all of the tags in all of the fish that have swam past that receiver since the last time we collected it. On days that we're fishing, we're either gill netting or long lining. So gill net is a big net that you put in the water. The netting is really small so that whenever fish try to swim through it, they get stuck in it, and then we pull it up, and that's how we get our sharks that we're tagging. And then long lining is just what it sounds like. It's a long line with a bunch of hooks on it that you put out in the water with bait, and then you pull it in and you get whatever sharks off the line. So whenever we're fishing, we are going after pretty much anything. We're just trying to get a sample. I do my research on sawfish, so I'm obviously hoping there's a sawfish on the line, but we collect data from everything. So we do measurements of how long they are. Sometimes we take blood. Sometimes we do what's called a biopsy punch, which is where you take some muscle, and then we do fin clips. And depending on what kind of shark it is, we will do a tag, either a satellite tag or an acoustic tag, which are basically just different ways to track animals. Or we'll put what's called a dart tag, which is basically just like an identifier so that if anyone ever catches it again, they can call us and tell us, hey, I caught this shark and it had this weird tag hanging out of it. So that just helps us with recapture data. So that's whenever I'm in the field doing science. Whenever I am doing my Marseille project coordinator, so when I have that hat on, if there's interns, I'm making sure that they're feeling safe and comfortable at Moat. I do professional development with them. I help them make sure they're getting the most out of their internship and learning things they need to learn, and they're able to communicate with the rest of the people in the lab, and making sure that the mentors have what they need to make sure that the experience is really good for the interns. I've been doing a lot of interviews with underrepresented minority scientists to get their experiences. I do a lot of curriculum development to try and figure out how we can make our program better and make people more excited about marine science, do better recruiting, do better supporting. And then I do a lot of tracking of where are our interns now and how are they doing. For minorities in shark sciences, lots of hats. Other hat for minorities in shark sciences, I do a lot of outreach with K through 12, kind of just being a representative, showing kids that people of color do shark science, women of color do shark science, and that it's really cool. Do a lot of fundraising so that we can do programs, do a lot of planning of programs. So like our workshops that we have where students come and get to spend a weekend in the field learning about shark tagging, trying to get some other programs up and running. That's a lot of just fundraising, outreach, working to recruit new members of MISS. So we have about 115 members right now from 15 different countries. So it's just kind of a lot of coordinating them, doing a lot of social media engagement and things like that.
How has COVID changed your daily work? Are you out on the boat still, or what are you up to these days?
I wish I was out on the boat still. So COVID really put a damper in my field work because obviously social distancing on a boat is really difficult. So I haven't been out since, I want to say April was the last time that I went out in the field. Trying to get back out, but it's really hard with the limited number of people on the boat and just trying to make sure that everything's safe. It's hard to do some of the work that we're trying to do because you just need a lot of people to be able to handle the animals and haul the gear and all of that. And so we very quickly get to the point where there are too many people on the boat for us to safely social distance. So haven't been out recently, but I am fingers crossed going sampling in a couple of weeks. Supposedly, I have to go get my COVID test and test negative and all of that to get approved. And then I will be good to go for a week-long sampling trip in the Keys. So hopefully that happens.
Yeah, for everybody. The sampling that you're doing, are you just off the waters off Sarasota, or do you go far afield, or where are you doing that work?
Most of the time we're in the Tampa Bay area, Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, Terracea Bay. There's lots of bays around here. That's usually where I go for sawfish stuff because we have yet to catch a sawfish in Tampa Bay, which is so annoying because they're definitely here because they swim past our receivers every year. They're like here and other people catch them and they call us. They're like, hey, I caught a sawfish. And we'll go to that exact same spot within hours of when they caught the sawfish. So they're just eluding us. Usually my sawfish sampling happens in the Keys where it's a lot more of a sure thing that I'm going to get a sawfish. So that's kind of where their main core range is. So usually whenever we go fishing there, we catch a sawfish. So that is where I do that work mostly, although we're still trying really hard to get some Tampa Bay sawfish so I don't have to drive down to the Keys all the time every time I want to go catch a sawfish.
So can you describe your project with sawfish a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'm interested in understanding where sawfish spend a lot of time for several reasons. The first reason is that the small-toothed sawfish is listed on the Endangered Species Act in the United States, which means that legally we are mandated by the federal government to protect that species. And there's a couple of things that go into that. The first is they have to designate what's called critical habitat, which are areas that have geographic and biological significance to the endangered species. Those are areas that have special protections because they were deemed essential for the survival of the species. So critical habitat for the small juveniles, for the little babies, has been designated already. They use the mangroves in the Keys, Everglades National Park area, 10,000 Islands Wildlife Reserve, and then Charlotte Harbor. So that's been designated, but the adults and the larger juveniles do different things. So they swim out of those areas. And we're just kind of like, where do they go when they leave? What do they do? So that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out, is where do the large juveniles and adults go once they leave these estuaries where they grow up? So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Where do they spend time? How do they move? When do they move? What areas are they in and when? So that we know what areas to protect. And then also we know what their major threats are. So I also look at if where they're spending time corresponds with where a lot of commercial fishing is happening. So I look at the interaction risk. So what's the likelihood that a commercial fisherman is fishing in that area, and what's the likelihood that a sawfish is swimming in that area, to figure out where the high risk areas are for sawfish, because one of their major threats is getting caught accidentally in commercial fishing gear. And for long lines, that's okay. Usually they are released and it's fine and it's not super stressful. For shrimp trawls, it's almost always fatal when they get caught in a shrimp trawl. So the more that we can limit that interaction, the better. Gill netting is also something that's really detrimental to sawfish. Fortunately for the sawfish, it's illegal to gill net in state waters in Florida, but it is legal in federal waters. And unfortunately, sawfish don't know to stop swimming when they get to the federal waters. So they don't know. So they're just swimming and they're like nice and safe in the state waters. And then they go just over there and all of a sudden they're in federal waters and they're in trouble. So I'm just trying to figure out, where are they going and are they potentially going to interact with commercial fishing?
I have a picture in my head of what a sawfish is, but can you describe what it is and how they hunt?
Yes. Okay. Sawfish are super cool. I love sawfish because when you look at them from the top, they look like scary. Like they have these long noses. They have these teeth-like things coming off of it, which is why they look like they have a saw on their face, which is why they call them sawfish. They're really flat. They got like some angry looking eyes on the top of their head. So when you look at them, you're like, man, I don't want to mess with this guy. He has a huge saw on his face. He's got these menacing eyes. He's like massive. They grow to be 16 feet in length. So you look at them and you're like, whoa, don't want to mess with that guy. Some people have called them danger snoots as a little like cute nickname, danger snoot.
I love that.
So when you look at them from that way, super menacing, you're like, oh man, whoa, don't want any of that. But when you look at them from the bottom, they have these ridiculous little smiles.
So, and I think I heard you describing before in another interview about how they hunt. They go and use their saw for the hunting. Can you describe that?
So they got these giant weapons on their face. So like that's useful. But it's also useful for them finding the food. They have these sensory organs. It's called a rostrum, their little saw. So they have that all along the edge of it. And so when they're swimming, it's kind of like a metal detector, but for fish. So like they can swim over a seagrass bed or a sandy bottom or whatever, where the fish are camouflaged or hidden. And so they wouldn't be able to see them, but they can actually sense them when they swim over them. They can feel them moving. So they actually can use it as a little fish detector to glide over an area. So they don't have to necessarily see the fish. They can feel them moving. The other useful part of it is they just whack things with it. So they get into a school of fish and they just whip their saw back and forth. And then they impale a bunch of fish and they injure them. And so the fish are like, oh no, I've been hit. And they're just kind of stunned and floating there. And then the sawfish can just swim by and swallow all of the injured fish whole. So sawfish are rays. That's why their little derpy mouths are on the bottom. Rays have their mouth and their gills on the bottom. Sharks have their gills on the side and the mouth on the front of the face. So that's how you can tell if something is a shark or a ray. So sawfish are rays. Lots of people think they're sharks. They are rays. They are flat sharks. And they have, just like other rays, these teeth that are kind of just like plates. So rays, their teeth are designed for just crunching things. So like crunching crustaceans, things with shells. So their teeth are just like nutcrackers. So sawfish don't actually chew their food. They just swallow it whole, which is pretty awesome because you get to have really cool things. Like one time there was a sawfish that was caught on a shark. So the shark went for the bait on the hook, got caught on the hook, and then the sawfish ate the shark. And so they swallow it whole. So you pull the sawfish out of the water and there's just a shark's tail hanging out of its mouth because it just tried to swallow it and it was stuck on a line. And so it didn't get it all the way down. And it's pretty funny. And then you just kind of like pull the shark out of its mouth. Like, what kind of shark were you? We need that for data. So yeah, pretty wild hunting strategy there. So fish detector, whack them all, swallow. That's their hunting strategy.
That's great. So is it an electric receptor? Because don't sharks have the ability to sense electrical signals? Is it the same kind of thing?
Yeah. So the ampullae of Lorenzini is basically they're like little channels where they can basically, it's a difference between the channels, the little freckles on the front of their face, and the canals basically lead to these nerve receptors inside their body. And so they actually can tell the difference between the voltage on the outside and the inside to be able to do things like know where they are in terms of like they can actually use electromagnetic fields to kind of figure out where they are in the world. So they have their own little GPS system. It also allows them to sense the electrical currents coming off of other organisms as well. So that's like with the sawfish, it feels the electrical energy from the fish in the water. So that's how it's identifying like, oh, there's something down here. There's something moving. Let me figure out what that is. Sharks and rays are really, really good at sensing things. So not all of them have super great eyesight, but they do have some really cool sensory organs and things that help them detect like really small changes in electrical currents and stuff like that, where they can like quote unquote see things moving in the water, which is pretty wild.
You said that they are cartilaginous, so they don't actually have bones. And I know that sharks have been, or rays too, I assume, have been around for millions of years. They're very evolutionarily successful in that respect. What is the benefit, the evolutionary benefit to having cartilage rather than bone?
So it basically depends on what you're trying to do. So we're on land. Bones are great. We don't have to worry about being less dense than our environment. We don't have to worry about buoyancy. So that's great. For us to be made of cartilage would not make that much sense because there's a lot of high impact things that we can run into on land and we can fall and stuff like that, we're gonna need shock absorbers when we run and jump and things like that. If we had cartilage, we'd just be really like jelly. We wouldn't have a lot of things to push up against when we're moving in our environment. But in the marine environment, it's great to be made of cartilage. You're not as dense. so you can be bigger without increasing your density too much. It also helps you be more hydrodynamic and more fluid. So sharks can turn quickly. They can change directions really quickly. Their bodies are very bendy, very flexible, which allows them to get the way that they swim is kind of with an undulating motion. So they actually can use the muscles from their entire body to propel themselves. And so those are things that really help them be successful, especially because a lot of sharks are predators. So with the exception of some like filter feeding, slow whale sharks, basking sharks, things like that. But they're going to be chasing things. So it's really good to have all of these adaptations that help you move through the water quickly, and help you change direction quickly, and help you get up speed really, really fast. So a lot of sharks, not only are they fast sustaining swimming speed, but they also can kick up 0 to 60 real fast. They're really good at ambushing things because they can get up speed really quickly, way faster than the bony fish that they're hunting. The bony fish that they're hunting, they see the shark, they start swimming, it takes them a little while to get to their top speed, whereas sharks can go boom like that to their top speed. So those are basically the benefits of their body shape, body plan. They're just very hydrodynamic, they're very flexible, they've got dermal denticles, which also help with hydrodynamicy, which are basically like kind of like teeth, but also kind of like scales, but they're not. So they have scales very different from bony fish have scales. They have placoid scales, teeth-like things. So they're very sharp. If you've ever had a shark rub up against you, if you have it rub like in the direction nose to tail, it's like smooth. But if you ever rub it the opposite direction, it is not smooth. It is really sharp and it will tear your skin up. Things that are that you learn very quickly when you start studying sharks is, yeah, it's hot outside, but if I'm going to be handling sharks, I should probably put on some long sleeves and long pants. Otherwise, my legs and my arms are going to get scratched up. So we have what's called shark burn, which is an unfortunate thing that a lot of shark scientists experience. It's like carpet burn times 10, where it basically feels like a bunch of jagged teeth rubbing against you all at once.
Well, it essentially is a bunch of jagged teeth rubbing against you at once, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you bleed. Yeah, it breaks the skin. Sometimes I look down and I'm like, oh, I'm bleeding. Got some shark burn.
And I bet that's extra special with the salt water too.
Yeah. That just is really great. Really great when you're in the water, try to get the shark tagged and released and everything. And it decides like, nope, I don't want any parts of this. Like sometimes I just wish I could speak shark. Be like, hey, just give me 1 minute to put this tag on you and then I'm going to let you go. Please don't fight me. But unfortunately, I cannot talk to sharks.
So I love sharks. I think they're fabulous. I know a lot of people are afraid of sharks, and I would love to give you the opportunity to dispel some myths about sharks. So go ahead.
Yes. Love this. Okay. So first of all, sharks don't eat people. Let's start with that. They are not interested in you. They have lived for 450 million years. They've evolved to eat very specific animals that live in the ocean, not us. So they are not interested in us. So a lot of times people are like, oh, man-eating shark, like the shark was trying to eat me, blah, blah, blah. The shark was not trying to eat you. I can guarantee you the shark was not trying to eat you. What probably happened was the shark is like, what is that? That kind of looks like it might be food. I'm going to taste it. Ew, that's not food. Swim away. Which is why when there's shark encounters, usually it's like a single bite because it's an exploratory bite, which sucks. Don't get me wrong. That sucks if you are the person that they did an exploratory bite on. You could lose an arm, you could lose a leg, depending on how big the shark is. But the shark is not out to get you. It's not being malicious. It's also important to know that shark encounters are super rare in the grand scheme of things. There are lots of other animals that are way more likely for you to have a bite from. For example, dogs. Dogs bite like 100,000 people a year get bit by a dog, and we bring them into our houses and we put cute outfits on them and we put them in purses. And I'm like, guys, you are so much more likely to get bit by a dog. Like, if you're not afraid of the dog, don't be afraid of the shark. So that's what I like to point out to people is that, yes, shark bites do happen. There are ways to make sure that you set yourself up to not be in a situation where you would get bit by a shark. So avoiding areas where there's dead or decaying animals that they might be feeding on, avoiding areas where they're chumming or where people are putting, dead fish, dead animals in the water to attract sharks. Just making sure that you are keeping in mind what the lifeguards are telling you. So sometimes lifeguards might say, hey, this beach is closed right now. And they're telling you that for a reason. And one of those reasons could be that there's shark mating going on or that there's a feeding frenzy or something like that. And they don't want you to get near them. So if you just follow instructions, make sure that you're staying away from areas that would attract sharks, you're usually going to be fine. So just keep that in mind. It shouldn't be a reason that keeps you from going into the ocean. Their chances of getting bit by a shark are really, really small. And that's not to diminish the tragedies that happen whenever people get bit by sharks. But it's super unlikely in comparison to a lot of other things that people don't think twice about doing. Sharks have much more to fear from us than we have to fear from them. Like, there are hundreds of thousands of sharks killed per year by humans. And then sharks kill like 1 or 2 people every other year. So like there are 2 beings in this equation, and one of them should be a lot more afraid of the other. So we're way more likely to kill the shark than the shark is to kill us. So just keep that in mind whenever you're going. And sharks are really just, most of them don't even want to be near you. Like, they're very shy. They don't like to be in places where there's a lot of people splashing around and making noise and stuff like that. They'll usually just swim away from the area. They get spooked really easily. I mean, you don't survive this long from like going near things that you don't know what they are. So they just kind of are like, oh, I don't know what that is. That's weird. That fish has lots of bubbles coming out of it. It looks weird and I don't want to go near it. So people that, like you said, you dive with sharks, they probably aren't paying any attention to you. They're just like, what's that? That's weird. And they're swimming around doing their thing. Sometimes sharks do get curious and they swim up, especially if it's an area where people have been feeding the sharks, which is a whole other thing. Yeah, so if they do swim up to you, that's probably because they've been trained to do that because people have been feeding them. So you just have to stay calm if you're diving and a shark swims up to you. They're probably just looking for food. When they figure out that you're not going to give them food, they'll just swim away. So just don't freak out. It's fine. They're just trying to get some fish. They're not after you. There are so many other more tasty things for them to eat.
Yeah, years ago, I helped with an exhibition in a museum on sharks. And I think that there was some graphic in there saying that you're way more likely to be killed by a toaster than by a shark. It's just ridiculous. Humans are really bad at assessing risk. Yeah,
we are. It's all Jaws' fault.
Yeah. I also remember something about there only being, there's like 450 different kinds of shark or something like in that area, but only 3 or 4 species have ever been known to bite humans, or is something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of species that have had encounters with humans. It's usually sharks that are in areas where there are a lot of people. That's just like basic probability. So like most of the time when you're in the ocean, the sharks that are around you are going to be like less than 3 feet long. They're not going to be like the giant great white sharks, whatever, that are like 12 feet long. It's going to be like something 3 foot long or smaller. So the chance of you encountering a shark that is super large is small. And then the chances of that encounter leading to a bite is even smaller.
So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about you and how did you get interested in chondrichthyans and being a marine biologist?
So I grew up moving around a lot. I'm a military brat. My mom was in the Air Force. She retired when I was in elementary school. We kind of had like our home base where my dad's side of the family is from in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So I grew up kind of having this home base on the coast. And my dad's from a big fishing family. My grandmother loved to fish. She like fished all the time. My dad also loves fishing. So even when we were moving around, when we were following my mom in the military, he would always find a lake or a stream or some place to fish. And so I grew up fishing with him, going to Myrtle Beach a lot. Yeah, so my family did a lot of fishing, but it's interesting because they fished, but nobody actually went in the water. So I was the weird one that would be asking, like, well, where do they live? What do they do in the ocean? And people are like, I don't know. My family's just like, I don't know. Who cares? They're tasty. This is where we go to catch them. I don't care what they do besides then. So the only thing they knew about fish was like where to go to catch them and when. And I would have questions like, why are they there? Why are they there at that time? So we have a lot of spot that run through Myrtle Beach. So they'll be in like huge schools and you can just like fish and like pull them out of the water. Like it's pretty crazy. And I'm like, why do they do that? Why are they all moving at the same time? Where are they going? Where are they coming from? And my family was just like, you ask a lot of questions, just eat the fish. And so my dad kind of saw that I was like really interested in this. And so he and my mom decided to send me to a marine science camp. And so I did that in high school or eighth or ninth grade, something like that. And I went to Marine Quest, which is a program at UNC Wilmington. And I loved it. It was the greatest thing ever. They were telling me about all of the questions that I ever had and answering some questions I didn't even know that I had. And it was super fun. And they were like, yeah, and you could be a marine scientist. And this is a job. And like, we're marine scientists. And I was like, what? You get paid to do this? That's so cool. So then I came home and I was like, Mom and Dad, I want to be a marine scientist. And they were like, you could do that? And I'm like, yes, I'm going to do it. And they're like, great, cool, glad you found something that you like. So my mom got me all of the college books and ended up going to the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, majoring in marine biology. And that's where I met Dr. Gavin Naylor, who I would then spend my rest of my undergraduate career working in his lab. And I kind of met him by accident. We literally like ran into each other and he's just so excited about sharks. It was infectious. So then I wanted to work in his lab. And I started working in his lab this summer after my freshman year as part of a research experience for undergraduates. And I was able to stay on through a series of different grants and work in his lab the entire time that I was in undergrad. And did a lot of work on hammerhead shark phylogeny, which is basically like a family tree, who's related to who. In the hammerhead family. Yeah, so I did that. And then I tried a lot of different things, like marine biology wise. I did some microplastic stuff. I did ocean acidification stuff, but I kept coming back to sharks. So then when I graduated, he said, so Jasmin, you still want to work with sharks? And I said, yes. He said, you want to come do a PhD with me? I said, no, sorry, but I really don't like pipetting things. And he said, that's fair. I know somebody. And he introduced me to my master's advisor, Dean Grubbs at Florida State University, who does field work and not as much lab work, which is kind of where I was headed. So started working with him on the Sawfish project because conservation was another big thing for me. I didn't want to just learn things to learn things. I was very interested in like, how can I help the environment? How can I help these animals? And so I started working on the Sawfish project with him. Been working on Sawfish ever since. People that study Sawfish, it's like they just forever study Sawfish in some capacity for like the rest of their career. So I was like, okay, I'm invested in this for the long haul, apparently.
What is something that you wish people knew about science?
I wish people knew that science is hard. I think people have a concept of it being hard, but I don't think that people really register everything that goes into science. And I think that's why people don't trust science. Like they think that we're just saying stuff to say stuff. But there's actually a really long process with lots of checks and balances and lots of quality control that happens. It's not just put a tag on a shark, say it swam into this area, tell all the fishermen they can't swim in that area. We, do a lot of evidence-based research. So like I spent 3 years working on this Sawfish project. And then I started writing the paper. And because it has some potential management implications, it goes through an extra strenuous process where it gets filtered through NOAA and it gets filtered through FWC and it gets filtered through everybody, because everyone's like, if this paper is going to come out and it is going to say something about fishing, and someone might potentially use that as a reason to make some sort of policy, it needs to be bulletproof. The goal is to protect the sawfish and have as little impact on the fishery as possible, which is why I spent so much time figuring out not only where are sawfish spending a lot of time, but when are they spending a lot of time? Because if they're not there at the same time that fishing is happening, it's not an issue. If they are, then okay, we need to kind of figure that out. Getting as much information as possible is helpful to everyone. The small-toothed sawfish has been listed since 2005, and it's 2020. So we've been working on this a long time. So it's not like we're just up and saying like, oh, there's an endangered species here, you can't do anything here. There's lots of thought that goes into that. Lots of people have input. The recreational fishing guide of Florida, he's the president, I think. He sits on the Sawfish recovery team. There are multiple agencies on the recovery team, academic institutions, a non-governmental, non-academic person. There's just a whole plethora of people on this panel, and I'm in communication with all of them. Everything runs through them. It's not like we're just out here willy-nilly, just like saying stuff to say stuff. And the same could be said about researchers that research climate change or research COVID-19. We're not just throwing stuff out there. Like we did the experiment or the study and then did it again and then ran the data analysis countless times. I think I ran my data probably like 150 times probably before I was like, all right, I believe it, writing it down. Yeah, science is hard. It's a really thought out process. It's not perfect. Obviously, scientists make mistakes, but we put in as much effort as possible to make sure that we aren't making mistakes. Part of science is recognizing whenever you've had an incorrect assumption about something and going back and changing it. So just because a scientist says like, oh, I think now that this is the case, it doesn't mean that the first scientist did a bad job. It just means that there is more information now and we're willing to change. So people think of it as a negative thing when scientists are like, never mind, we think this. But you should think of it as a positive thing because we're willing to say that was incorrect and change our way of thinking to match the evidence. We could just keep saying like, no, we were right the first time and just be wrong as all get out. But instead, we're like, course correction. That was incorrect. That was what we thought based on the evidence we had at the time. Now we have more evidence. Now we think this. But I think that's just a general good principle for everyone. Like saying that you are wrong does not mean that you were a bad scientist or a bad person for thinking something before you had all of the evidence that you needed. So it's my spiel on science.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of things around COVID-19 and science happening real time, and there's differing results coming out, and people in the public who don't have an understanding of what you're talking about thinking or saying, those scientists don't know what they're talking about. And I'm glad that you said, science is hard. It takes a long time. I consider science a verb. It's something that is ongoing, and I'm glad you said that because that is a point that I would really like to drive home. You said at the beginning that you are you've organized a group, the Minorities in Shark Sciences, or MISS, and I'd like to talk to you or have you talk about what it's like to be not only a Black scientist, but also a female scientist and a female Black scientist. You know, that there's a lot of intersection there. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we created MISS is that sometimes being in shark science can feel isolating because you got this intersectionality thing happening where you're a woman, you're also a person of color, and you're both of those things simultaneously. And so it's a really unique place to exist in a field that is mostly white. A field that's becoming increasingly female, but when you look at the top, when you look at the people in charge, it's still mostly men. You know, we're having a generational shift where now there's a lot more women. I think maybe even more women than men. But when you look at people who have power, it's still men. So it's a weird space to be in, and it has a lot of challenges that are very unique. So women face challenges, people of color face challenges, but women of color in science face really unique challenges that can be difficult to explain to people that aren't experiencing them. And so that's one of the reasons why having a community is really important and why representation is really important. Because if you're going into a field and you already feel isolated and there is no end in sight for you, like you can't see another person that looks like you where you're trying to go, then you're just going to feel like you're going to be isolated the whole time. Like if I'm an undergraduate student and I can't name a single woman of color shark scientist, and that's what I want to be, it's like, wow, I feel really isolated right now. And it's not ever going to get better. There's like no one else in front of me either. So that can feel really isolating. So we wanted to create this space where women of color interested in shark science could connect with each other, and people on their level, people ahead of them, people behind them, and just everyone knows that you're not alone, because there's so few of us and we're so not looked at or acknowledged that it can be hard to even know who's out there. So me and the other co-founders, some of us knew of each other vaguely. Like we had a phone call once whenever Jada and Amani were applying to grad school. They were interested in Dean's Lab, and they called me to ask about my experiences as a Black woman in Dean's Lab. They called me to ask about that. And that's like the thing, is the only person you can ask that question to is another Black woman. Like if you asked a white man, like, hey, is this person good? Like, is this person someone that promotes diversity? Is this person someone that supports people of color? Is this person someone that supports women? Is this a good environment to be in as a woman of color? Is the institution a good environment to be in as a woman of color? Is the city a good environment to be in as a woman of color? Like, there's no way that you could get a solid answer from someone that's not a woman of color, because they just aren't going to notice things. They aren't going to notice all of the Confederate flags everywhere, because that's not a trigger for them. They're not going to notice the looks. They're not going to notice the microaggressions because it's not targeted at them. So we need a network of people that have gone through undergrad and grad school and postdocs and know these are good conferences to attend. These are safe spaces to go. These places are not good places to go. Because if we're all just kind of flailing around, then a lot of us are going to end up in situations that aren't good for us. And so it's really important to have that sense of community, not only so you don't feel alone, but also so that you have someone that has your back. Because the fact of the matter is that not all places are safe for women of color. And it's really important to know that going into things so you don't end up in a really unsafe situation, because I don't think people think about it a lot, but in some cases, it could be a life or death thing. Like if you end up in a town that does not like you, like it could be a life or death situation. People of color get killed for random reasons in all kinds of places. And so having that kind of check of, okay, let me ask someone else who's been there what it's like, or Let me make sure that this person is a person that's going to be conducive to my growth and isn't going to try to stunt my growth because of some bias that they have. Those are really important. And then also just having a space where you can talk about things and not have to go through the emotional labor of explaining it. So like having a place where you can be like, all right, listen to what this person said to me. And you just say it and everyone in the room goes, that's not okay. Versus being like, this is what the person said to me, and having half the people in the room go like, well, I don't see a problem with that. Then that's just invalidating. So having someone that understands and like hears the microaggression and things and like understands why you're upset without having to explain it can be really good. Not to say that having allies isn't important, like having someone that maybe hasn't been through it, but can like listen is great, but there's something extra when you have someone that can actually empathize with you in a real way of like, I've been there too. Because as great as an ally is, they're never going to be able to say like, I've been there too. So there's another piece of that that's really important to having representation and having a space where you feel safe and comfortable talking about those things without being worried about offending people. Because sometimes whenever you bring up stuff, people, like white people, get very defensive. You know, there's this, I feel personally attacked because you're making a complaint about another white person to me, and it triggers some people, and that can be exhausting to try and like dance around the person's feelings while also expressing your feelings and not just trying to do this weird dance. That can be stressful as well. So I think the thing that's really important for people to realize about being a woman of color in science is that there's a whole extra weight that exists that we walk around with. And if you don't see it, that's just because we're carrying it very well, that we shouldn't have to carry it. And I sometimes talk to people and I'll just like randomly share a tidbit or a story and they'll be like, oh, that happened to you? Like, wow, that's heavy. And I'm like, it is, but I got to carry it with me. I can't change who I am. And people ask like, what's it like being a Black woman in science? And I'm like, I mean, I can tell you what my experience is, but I can't really explain what I'm going through. And I don't have real evidence because someone's always going to be able to say like, well, I didn't say that because you're Black, or I didn't say that because you're a woman. I said that because of some other thing. And there's not a control. Like there's not a white male Jasmin walking around with my exact same credentials, living my exact same experience that I could be like, oh yeah, when he gave that presentation, nobody questioned him. But whenever I did it, I got all kinds of people questioning my science. So it's hard because you're constantly caught in this like gaslighting situation where you're like, if I complain about it, someone's probably going to say like, oh, it wasn't a sexist thing or it wasn't a racist thing. It was this other thing. And you could be like, it's not what it felt like, but I can't prove it. You can't prove that someone's racist or sexist. You just got to deal with it. Like, very frustrating.
Yeah. I can imagine that having a network of scientists in similar fields would be incredibly useful for somebody going through what you're describing. So that is, you said that you and a couple other people founded it. You want to give just a little bit of a plug for what it is in case there are folks who might want to be interested in contacting you about that?
Yeah, so we're Minorities in Shark Sciences. We're on Instagram and Twitter as Miss_Elasmo. And then our website is misselasmo.org. So if you go to our website, if you are a woman of color and you're interested in shark science, you can become a member just by filling out the membership form. If you're a shark scientist, but you don't identify as a woman of color and you want to just support our mission and be an ally, then we have the Friends of Miss membership that you can join. And of course, if you're not a shark scientist, or you are, and you want to support us financially, there's also a donate button on the page as well.
Great. For my final question, I'd like to ask you, what is your favorite thing about being a scientist?
My favorite thing about being a scientist is finding answers to questions. Being able to answer those questions, not only for myself, but for everyone, is really exciting. So, like, before I did this research, the question of where do sawfish go when they leave the estuary was unanswered. Like, we had a general idea, we had some encounter reports, we had a little bit of data, but not to the scale that I did my project on. So to be able to say, I know not only where they go, but when they go and what month they move and what month they come back is amazing. To be able to answer a question that no one knew the answer to is like awesome. I really like that. And I really like being able to contribute knowledge to the world. Not only just like when I was a little kid and I had a question, and most of the time my questions would have answers in an encyclopedia. And then you get older and you start asking more intricate questions that don't have answers. And being able to be the person that finds the answer is super cool.
I really like that a lot. So thank you for that. And with that, I think we will say thank you to Jasmin Graham for your willingness to answer all of my questions today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. I've put links to Miss in the episode notes, so please go check out their site and support their work. If you've learned something here today, or if you have any questions for suggestions for scientists we should interview, we'd love to hear from you. Our address is info@scibarpodcast.org. If you'd like to help keep these podcasts and our online events free for everyone, we'd be grateful for donations of any size. You can make a one-time donation, or you can be an ongoing supporter through Patreon. And I'll put links to both of those options in the episode notes. I want to say thanks to Dr. Sarah McAnulty from Skype a Scientist for introducing me to Jasmin. Skype a Scientist connects scientists from all over the world with teachers, groups, and families for real-time online sessions. Whether you're a scientist who wants to do outreach, or a teacher or parent who wants to connect with a scientist, check out skypeascientist.com. As always, thanks to my producer Graham Tully for making us sound good, and to Jonathan Coulton for the use of his song Mandelbrot Set for our theme music.
Badass fucking fractal, and you're just in time to save